Listening. Select missing word, guided practice. Question number 1.
That our theatre, one of the biggest draws of people for tourism into this country is theatre, and that London theatre attracts more people from the United States than any other single.
Okay, now the recording is about tourism. And if you look at the options, already I can say that tourism attraction and tourism event, those seem to be the words that are most closely related to tourism. And even out of these two, if I have to put my money on one, I'll say attraction maybe is the right one. Now, and when you hear the audio, the last couple of words before the beep are any other single attraction, right? Because we say there are different tourist or different tourism attractions in city in the UK or London where this audio is about. And if you have paid attention and have been able to understand, the speaker says that attracts more tourists than any other. So that is any other attraction. That is the correct option. Next question now.
But just how much of the thought and the art that shaped the 20th century was happening here in Vienna. And one of the things that I find so fascinating is that came out in the panel, listening to our panelists, was just the importance of cross-fertilization in the arts, this sort of idea of taking the example of the cafes, for example, where people of different disciplines came together, talked, discussed, were inspired by each other, sparked off each other. And that to me is...
Now the recording is about arts, and the speaker talks about people meeting, exchanging ideas, discovering new things around arts. And the last few words, that to me is very fascinating because she's interested, she's exploring this thing about arts in Vienna. So that is very fascinating to her, means commands her attention. So that to me is highly unimaginable, doesn't make any sense. That to me is incredibly adventurous. There's nothing to suggest an adventure here. That to me is supremely rewarding. So that, could have made sense. But when you compare it to that, to me is very fascinating because she's exploring, right? And you explore out of fascination. She's researching, she's exploring. And you do that out of fascination, out of interest. So that's why we go with very fascinating. Next question now.
So a lot of it aren't things that are limited to engineering, but broader questions about women in the workforce. And then something else we found over the years is just how important small but subtle cues are regarding gender and technology, things that young men and young women pick up really starting very early as kindergarten and grade school, regarding expectations about femininity.
The recording is about gender in engineering. And two of these options, you can immediately see they are related to gender, feminism and masculinity. So this was an easy one if you have been paying attention. So that's our correct option. And now the last question in this session.
The first thing that I would say is that for biology in particular, it is shocking how much you are like a fly. The toolkit of genes that every organism has is shockingly similar across a very wide range of species. So the way that you build different organisms is largely a question of how you deploy that toolkit. It's not that the fundamental building blocks are so...
All right, so the recording is about biology. And the last few words were fundamental building blocks are, and we have 5 options. Fundamental building blocks are so very important. Fundamental building blocks are so very different. Fundamental building blocks are so complex. Fundamental building blocks are so astounding. Fundamental building blocks are so expensive. So the last 2 and the first, I think, don't make any sense. Maybe the candidate is so very different or so complex. But if you have really tried to understand. In the beginning, she says that I think something like the set of genes that are available, it's very similar. And then he says, it's not that the blocks are so very, so she's already said they're similar. So that means they are not very different. So that's why the correct option is so very different. So in this case, it was important that you understand pretty much the whole recording, because you have to make a link between the first part and the last part of the recording. Now, I have mentioned during these exercises that you should focus on capturing the last few words. And when you do that, you can note them down. So you don't always have to remember. You can also write them down, the last few words. Along with that, any other notes, because some of these recordings can be quite long. So if you feel when you're listening, it helps you to understand, then feel free to take notes as we do in other listening questions.